Hello, welcome to my video titled What They Never Taught You About Stata. On my screen, I'm showing a couple of things. I'm showing the main hub, main user interface for Stata. I'm using Stata version 15. The main Stata user interface has it's this portion here to the bottom left of my screen. There is a command line where you can type a command. I'll just type one, for example, display 1+1, just to test it out. And above the command line here, we have the result of my command. Great. Towards the right, we have a variables section where if I had uploaded a data set, it would show the variable names and a label if they have any. To the bottom right of this data hub, we have the properties of said variables. Again, if I had any, it would show me for any variable that I choose, the type it is, the format, and more. To the right of my screen, I have an example of a do file. This is equivalent to an R script. It's a place where you want to organize your commands, right? You don't want to write an entire analysis on the command line because you lose it and you won't be able to keep track of what you've done. And you also can only do one command at a time in the Stata command line. So it's for efficiency and also for purposes of knowing exactly what you did and being able to replicate it. So I'm showing an example of an existing do file that I have. Oh, I found a typo. Okay. And the main purpose of this video is to show you all some of the organizational tricks that I have learned throughout my time as a researcher and PhD. So one of the main things that I think is underrated in this data space is file organization that will make your life easier. So anytime I start a new research project, I organize my files, and you can see this in the file window here. It's titled CHIS Homeowner. I'm just using an example of a project where I'm using publicly available data from the California Health Interview Survey to see trends in home ownership status in California. This is a survey that is representative of the population in California. And I'm just doing this for an example, right? So anytime I begin a new project, I'll give the folder, the project folder, a title. In this case, it's CHIS-homeowner. And within the project, I have a series of folders. I haven't organized this do file because it should be in my do folder. So just to provide an example, I just created these folders. So I have a do file folder. This is where I would like all of my do scripts to live. So I'll just move that there. And I have a data folder. And usually within that data folder, I have a clean data and a raw data folder. What does that mean? In the raw data folder, I want to put any uncleaned data. So the CSV file or the .data file or any kind of file that I have not cleaned, that I have not touched. I directly downloaded it from the source. That's where it would go. And then in the clean data file, that's where I would want to save any cleaned data from the scripts that I have been writing and running. So that's the data folder. I also make a logs folder. This is a folder where I save the logs that the Stata that I've told Stata to keep track of. A log file, for those that are not sure what that even means, is a way for you to kind of have a receipt of everything that Stata has outputted and inputted from your do file. I also have a tables folder, and this is a folder that will hold any tables like regression tables or descriptive tables that I may want to export out. So everything has a home. You could ignore the writing folder. That's where I might keep a copy of the manuscript or any Word document reports, but it doesn't feed into or relate to my Stata do file, so it's not really relevant for today's video. Okay, so that's a pretty easy step, right? You create a project folder, you create a do file folder, a data folder, a logs folder, a tables folder. Before you start your project, you should make sure that there's data in your raw folder, in your raw data folder. So this is where you'll want to put in that data file that you are working with, that you downloaded. That should be populated. When you first start your project, there will be nothing in the clean data folder because you haven't cleaned the data yet, you haven't produced it, and you haven't told Stata to save it there. Now, what does this have to do with your do file, and how will having this organization make your life easier? So within the do file, so I'm now moving on to the Stata script where you tell Stata what to do. That's where these file paths come in handy. So at the start of my do file, let me zoom this in. So there we go. Okay, perfect. I'll just put it in the entire screen for now. So I want to focus on these macro, oops, I did not mean to show my own. Okay, so I want us to focus here. So within the do file script, I am now defining these macros. And the goal of these macros is so that once I do call in the raw data file, once I do call in any other data I'm working with, and then once I call out, I don't have these clunky file paths in my commands, right? Because there could be more error and file paths can be really long. So a file path that I'm talking about is like, for example, in your computer, you always have a kind of user dash. If you have, I don't know, they might say library and your file lives in your desktop. Oops. And you've created the project title, right? In this case, my project title is just home owner. And within that, remember that we have a data folder and there's a raw data folder. So if we wanted to call, this is just an example. If we wanted to call the data that lives in this folder, you might be inclined to put the command that allows you to use that data file. And in this case, let's assume it is a data file that, let me just clean this up where we have it. Let's assume it's a data file that's called adult 2019. Bit consistent. Okay, so this is in my imaginary world, this is a data file that I have downloaded that lives in my raw data folder in the project directory and folder that I just created. So this looks very clunky, and I wouldn't want to use this entire file path for every command in which I'm inputting or outputting a file. And so what macro define in data does is take care of that for me so that once I do use the use command, I don't have to write everything out. What would live in macro define is the entire file path that I just worked with. So I would take this, and I just had these as a placeholder as an example. Oh, what happened? Okay, you just want the file path here. So you want the file path here. So I'll explain this command now a bit more. So macro define in data and then file path to a folder. Actually, this should not have the file. Perfect. So This is telling us to define a macro, which is a thing that we don't want to rewrite over and over again. And we're going to call it in data. You could have changed this portion to anything. It could be named best data set ever, though that's a long name, or it could be named in or data file. You could call it anything. But the key is that once you do call it, you want to put a $sign before it so that Stata knows when you call the macro, which you titled in data, it would replace everything here with this file path. And that would allow you to then run. Let me double check if we actually need that dash at the end. Check my real example, and no, we actually do not need that path at the end. Okay, perfect. So we don't need that dash at the end. We already have a dash here. But essentially what we're doing is we're telling Stata to take a shortcut. We don't want to write the file path every time we're talking about a data set. Similarly, after we're done cleaning, we don't want to write the entire file path here. Right, we don't want to tell Stata, save this to the clean data folder and call this version 2. We'd rather just do what we just did, but this time use the other macro that we've defined, and that one's called out data. So this macro here would have, instead of raw, this would be calling the clean data folder. It's where we want our data to be outputted to. We're defining this macro, we're calling it out data. Again, you could call it anything you want. And this is a signal that I want Stata to read when I do the $sign out data, that I want it to read this folder, the clean data folder. So then I could clean this up, right? This should now be $sign in data. And I pretend I have a bunch of script here to clean the data, and which I do below, but we're not going to go into that today. It's just an efficient way to call in and out, so that you don't have these clunky file paths in your do file, and you can really hone in and focus on the important work, which is your analysis. You can do similar things when you're saving your logs and saving your tables. I'll let you all work through those as an example, but feel free to comment if you have any questions.